So if I have his name right for once, Charles Katibi's on the phone. Did I get it right this time?
Yes.
Oh my God!
Well done.
Okay. How'd you enjoy your stay up here last time? Did we show you a good time?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay,
I had a
good.
great time. Yeah.
All right, good. Okay, because we took you to places like the mines and took you out to dinner and stuff like that. Kind of wined and dined you a little bit. And that group that you spoke in front of in Casper, Wyoming, at the Petroleum Club. What a great group of people.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was excellent.
Yeah, they meet every month like that. And I'm just impressed. We need more people meeting in groups like that. They like your kind of a talk just because it's better than anything on TV. I mean, honestly, it is. It's either that or The Bachelor. Or The Bachelorette.
I'm in good company then.
Honey Boo Boo, if that's still on the air. All right, so I've been ranting on for the past hour and reading some really good points from Justice Scalia, because he just tore this whole Supreme Court decision involving Obamacare apart. But this is something you study for a living. Let me ask you this. When you first heard it, before you even heard how they came to the conclusion, what was your first gut reaction?
How they came to it?
Before you knew how they came to it, you just heard that they upheld it.
Yeah, I had a feeling they would. That was it was expected. I knew the way that the oral arguments were, the way that they were receiving the oral arguments, they were so skeptical of the case that they were making.
Right.
About, not so much about the meaning of the words within the law, but what it would do to the law. And that was basically the bulk of the case of the majority against the plaintiffs. And what they were saying is that, yes, if read plainly, this statutory language is absolutely clear. Yeah. However, it must be read within the context of the larger law and the larger goals of the law.
Right.
Which is kind of strange for court justices to be making public policy on behalf of the American people, to be saying that.
Yeah, see, my first gut reaction was, even before they found, before they came out with a decision, and I wasn't doing what you were doing. I was not doing blow by blow following the arguments here. But I just thought, the first time around, when it came to the individual mandate, they found a way to make the thing appear to be constitutional, even though it still isn't. And I thought, they're going to do that again. They're going to twist themselves into pretzels to find a way to make this thing appear constitutional, even though it's still not. And that's exactly what they did.
Absolutely. But the most ridiculous thing is that this case should have been even easier, because what the plaintiffs, what the plaintiff in the 2012 Supreme Court case was about, it was about trying to show that the individual mandate could not fit within the confines of the Constitution.
Right.
Now, that's a whole thing in and of itself. All this was doing was showing that the rule that the IRS had set to comply with the law could not even fit or comply with a single sentence of the Affordable Care Act.
Right.
So this wasn't about complying with the Constitution or about the constitutionality of the law. This is about just the agencies complying with a law passed by Congress.
Here's what I was saying, but I'd be really interested to hear what your opinion is on my opinion, because my thought was, it's bad enough. With the purpose of let me back up a little more.
Sure.
I kept saying over and over again last hour, I said it several times over, a free people threw off tyranny. Now, after they got rid of tyranny, they formed a government. The purpose of the government was to protect freedoms that we're naturally born with. And the idea is, military defends our borders, police keep the peace, and the courts will settle our disputes. And that's really what it was supposed to be, nothing more than that. So anytime that Congress does something, and it's going to do it, Congress is going to do stuff outside the Constitution from time to time. We rely on the courts to smack that down and say, you can't do that, get inside your box. Well, now we have a Congress that is way outside of the box of the Constitution. So is the president, so is the bureaucracy, and now the court is complicit in that. They're helping them.
Well, that was the original intention of the Supreme Court and how it's supposed to interpret the Constitution in relation to Congress. But this doctrine has started to form, the doctrine of deference, where if it's ambiguous, if the language of a text is ambiguous, then the doctrine supposes that the court should side with the government. And that's the whole idea of judicial restraint,
right? In
that it is not the job of the Supreme Court to save the American people from their political choices. Because remember, in the end, we voted for Obama, and we voted for that Congress that passed Obamacare. And even though the individual mandate very, very well may be unconstitutional, what John Roberts said is it is not his job to save us from our political mistakes.
Right now, Justice Scalia, boy, have you read his dissent yet?
I have.
Now part of it that I really liked was, now I'm going to paraphrase him here because,
sure.
Well, the language that he uses, I really get a kick out of the way he writes. You can tell this man's a serious thinker, but I sort of have to translate that into average Joe Schmuck language, not because my listeners are stupid, but because they don't think on Scalia's level. So it seemed to me he was basically saying it is not the job of the court to take a red pen and correct the language of a law in order for it to remain a law and constitutional. Strike it down, send it back to the Congress. That's their problem. Is that essentially what he was saying?
That is, yeah. So what he was saying is this is just clear. If we wanted to follow the law and just follow the law as their job is to uphold the Constitution, then they should enforce Obamacare the way in which it's written. Yeah. But that's not what the IRS did, and that's not what the court ultimately decided with.
Yeah. Okay.
Really unfortunate.
So we can just throw up our hands at this point, as far as I'm concerned, in the Supreme Court ever smacking down Obamacare, not based on, and you and I would have looked at it based on the Constitution. Will the Supreme Court smack this down based on these following constitutional issues? It seems to me, maybe I'm being cynical. Fine, I'm being cynical about it. It seems to me that the majority of this court wants to keep Obamacare, and they're going to do what they have to do to keep it.
Yeah, that was actually, that's funny. That was the opinion statement Scalia said, in which there seems to be a clear preference for laws passed by this administration, and they think that their job is to just protect the laws that they like and to throw down the ones that they don't. Well, that's not the job of a justice at all. It's to uphold the Constitution and to make sure that laws are being properly enforced.
Yeah. So at this point, what good is our Supreme Court anymore? I mean, again, I know I'm being cynical on this, but if they're willing to do that with Obamacare, then honestly speaking, a Supreme Court justice can either be, and they're supposed to be there for life, so you can't coerce them, you can't bribe them, you can't threaten them, whatever the case is. But it looks now like they give in to political preference and political pressure. So what good are they anymore?
Well, they always did. There's no way to completely remove your personal philosophical biases, but but it's just become so much more blatant these days. I think it's finally a wake-up call to Republicans in Congress that the courts are no longer going to do their job for them. And what I mean by that is Obamacare creates winners and losers, and a lot of times the winners are so much more vocal about their opinion politically. And a lot of times the losers don't speak up as much. So there's so much political firepower on the part of the allies of Obamacare. But what Republicans need to do is they need to take that job upon themselves and fix this legislatively, because that's all that's left.
Right.
There is no more. Yeah, we've tried the constitutional route. We've even just tried the route of enforcing Obamacare.
Yeah.
So now it's up to Congress now to actually do the job of passing legislation, putting somebody in the White House that can sign that legislation, and maybe we could finally start to pick apart this law.
Yeah, that's going to have to be the only route we take now, because, again, the courts clearly are not going to help us in this. Now, I look at it as Obamacare eventually collapses under its own weight anyway. This is what I tell people, and it's hard to hear, Charles, but either way, I win. See, I want limited government and a lot of personal freedom and just basically government out of our lives and my liberty back and get rid of the debt and all that good stuff. So we have one of two ways that we're going to do this. Either we wise up and we get it done legislatively, or the entire thing comes collapsing down, which is really going to suck for all of us as we go through another Great Depression. But I still get what I want if it happens that way. That's the hard part to hear. But
if people learn that the reason why the insurance markets are collapsing is part of Obamacare, because remember, a large part of the opposition to Obamacare isn't that it went too far; it's that it didn't go far enough. So I'm not completely convinced of the case that just because a law ruins society or the economy, people are going to realize, oh, so that's the reason why my life is falling apart.
Let's talk about the courts for just a minute here, because when we talk about what kind of a justice we're looking for when a president picks the next Supreme Court justice, and we've got a couple that are coming up on retirement. They're going to same thing. Either they're going to decide to retire or God's going to retire them, one or the other. So when that happens, there's always a discussion on what you look for in a Supreme Court justice. Can you define that? Are we looking for, I mean, there's strict constructionists, there's constitutionalists, there's all sorts of terms. What do you think we're looking for?
I think if you're somebody that is longing for limited government and a more restrained state, it's funny, you're actually going to be looking for a more activist judge, someone that's willing to stick his neck out and say that these laws, even ones that are passed by our elected representatives, these are ones that break the law and they should be struck down, and they should be Congress or a state legislature should go back and rewrite them to comply with the law.
Well, let's be clear that when you say more activists, you're not talking about someone who's going to write law from the bench.
No.
But you're talking about striking down laws with their hammer.
Yeah. And I mean, this wasn't, even when this wouldn't have been an activist decision if Scalia had his way and they had enforced the law, because they would have just been enforcing it as it is. What the majority decision is, what Roberts and his cohort had decided, was that they were going to give the green light to the IRS to retroactively change the law, law that Congress passed. So they are the ones that overstep their bounds completely in this regard. Yeah.
Okay, let's get back to the Supreme Court. Or here's a theory that I have, and again, just go ahead and shoot me down if you think I'm wrong. I've watched, Charles, people join, let's say, the EPA. They're activists, environmentalists. They've been trying to get stuff done, but they find that showing up and protesting just flat out isn't working. So they join the EPA. That way they can use the EPA and the government itself to get done what they want to get done. It seems to me that there are some activists that are also joining courts in the United States to basically write law from the bench. Now, I don't necessarily say that that's the Supreme Court, although I do wonder about at least one of the justices, and I don't mean Roberts. Do you see? Yes. Do you see that happening? Do you think I'm off base there?
No, not at all. So what the argument that the majority made is that this language is too ambiguous to just take on face value.
Right.
And if you read it within the larger context of the law, they say that you cannot enforce it plainly. You cannot enforce that statute of the law plainly because the rest of the law would fall apart. And we've talked about this before, the way how most experts think of Obamacare as a three-legged stool. You want to force companies to offer a certain kind of insurance. You want to force people to buy that insurance. Yeah. And you want to subsidize that insurance because that insurance is going to get very expensive with all those rules and regulations.
See, here's the problem with it. With everything that you just said there. First off, we're going to force people to. We're going to force companies to. As soon as you said we're going to force people and companies, that should tell a judge, well, that's unconstitutional. Then when you say subsidize, You mean take money from force from one group of people and give it to another group of people? Well, that should be unconstitutional right there.
Well, you're not going to get any arguments from me against that.
Okay.
However, we've given the federal government the power to tax. We've given them the power to regulate through the Commerce Clause. I mean, so at the end of the day, we even outside of the arguments over the constitutionality of the individual mandate, we gave the Obama administration over decades and centuries all the legal authority they needed to enforce this law, unfortunately.
Well, and then when they stepped outside of their legal authority, I hate to say this, but in some ways the American people did step up. You had a Tea Party movement and so on. People did step up and complain, but they didn't stick with it. And if we really don't stick with it, then we're allowing them to get away with their overreach. Yeah.
There is so much power that is concentrated, not just in Washington, but even further and more powers being taken away from Congress, not just war-making powers, but regulatory powers, as you saw with the IRS. I mean, the job of agencies, even within their bounds, is so much power to when Congress passes laws, the agencies are perfectly free to return to those laws and reinterpret them the way that they want within reasonable boundaries. But what they've done with this one is completely reinterpreted the language itself. They basically reinterpreted the English language to get this outcome where they're allowed to offer subsidies on the federal exchange, even though it said quite plainly these subsidies are available on exchanges established by a state.
What really kills me, Charles, is not so much when people reinterpret language. Well, that's kind of vague, and perhaps overall they really meant to say this, but it kind of came out as vague. It drives me crazy when people have completely lost the argument. So instead what they do is they change the meanings of words. And again, we let them get away with it, and that helps us to lose the fight.
Well, isn't that the progressive strategy always been? To just change the definition of words.
Sure.
They use conservative, limited government words, fair competition, fairness, all these sorts of things, rights even.
That last one here, I'll give you one of my favorite arguments. I'm very proud of this. I do have a patent on this, but I'll give you free rein to use it. So when people say healthcare is a right, well, a right is not a product or a service provided to you by the government. So when they actually argue that point with me, I just ask them, then where's my free gun? Tell me what line I get into. There's a government agency handing out guns because the Constitution says I have the right to bear arms. Therefore, that's got to be something that the government is providing for free. Well, now again, you see heads explode and gray matter all over the place. Are you writing an article about this? I bet you are.
I've just been swamped with this, but I will be writing an article very, very soon.
Okay. As soon as you do, I'm going to feature it on my reading assignment page at boldrepublic.com. But where can they find your websites, Wyoming Liberty, and your work?
wyliberty.org.
All right. Hey, thanks for coming on and explaining all this.
Thank you.
All right.